Welcome to lesson number 3 for the Thailand Powerlifting Federation Online Academy. And in this lesson, we're going to be talking all about everybody's favorite lift, the bench press. The bench press is the second event to be performed in powerlifting competition, and it's one of the most deceptive lifts performed in any gym in the world. People believe that the bench press is more of a brute strength lift, where the lifter simply has to muscle the weight off of their chest. But as you'll learn in this video, the bench press is one of the most technical lifts you could perform, and it takes a careful eye to properly assess and train the bench press. There are a number of factors that are involved in a successful bench press, and we're going to go over all of them in this video. The first topic to be discussed in this video are the equipment rules in IPF regulation for competition. Which equipment are we allowed to use? How does this equipment make a difference in how we bench press? And how do we implement this equipment into training? After this, we're going to be talking about technical aspects of the bench press that you can implement while training, such as your leg drive, setting up an arch, how to breathe properly, and then training techniques for accessories in the bench press. I recommend to anybody watching this video that when you take your videos for training purposes and analytical purposes, you take videos from two different angles. The first angle is going to be from a direct side angle, so that when you unrack the bar and the camera is looking directly at your body from the side, the frontmost plate will directly cover the plate facing away from the camera. This is the ideal angle to look at your videos from the side. The other angle that you should be filming your bench press from is a direct front angle. And the way to set this up, you'll take your camera, put it on either a bench press or a tripod, and have it facing the bench press so that when you're sitting down on the bench press getting ready to set up, the camera should be seeing your back. And then as you set up and lay down on the bench press, you'll have a good look at your elbow angle, where your shoulders are set up on the bench press, and then any alteration in the path that the bar comes down directly to your chest and then back up again. If you take the time to film each and every set from these various angles, you'll be able to better assess your movement and improve your technique and eventually your strength on the bench press. So with that being said, let's begin our talk about equipment used on the bench press. So the most common piece of equipment found in bench press training and in competition are wrist wraps. Now, wrist wraps are a supportive piece of equipment made from a very thick fabric, usually about a half a meter to 1 meter long, and is wrapped around the joint of the wrist to support the wrist under the pressure that it's going to receive from the barbell. Depending on where you place the bar within your hand, the barbell can actually bend your wrist backwards while bench pressing, and that excess pressure over the course of time and with enough weight can lead to wrist injuries, which is why people wear wrist straps while bench pressing. Now, when you use a wrist wrap, you want to wrap above and below the joint accordingly. You can wrap as tight as you like, so long as the entire wrist joint is properly secured by the wrap. There are quite a few variations to wrist wraps and how they are used by lifters. Some wrist wraps are very stiff, and then when they're wrapped on the wrist, offer a very cast-like feeling. The lifter feels very locked in, but some people find that this wrist wrap is a little bit too painful, especially for people with smaller or more delicate wrists. I prefer to use a more flexible wrist wrap like Mark Bell's Gangster Wraps, because you can pull them in on your wrist a lot tighter and you can cinch the fabric down onto your wrist to allow very little movement. I also much prefer the thumb loop that's offered on the Gangster Wrap versus another type of thumb loop, say offered by SBD, because the thumb loop on the Gangster Wrap is much bigger, so it allows more room for your thumb to move around. Once you're done wrapping your wrist up, you're able to easily get the thumb loop off of your thumb, which is very important because in IPF competition, you are not allowed to have your thumb loop on your thumb when you go out to lift, whether that be the squat or bench press. So that extra little bit of room is really nice, because if you wrap your wrist very tightly like I do, it'll be easier to get your thumb loop off quickly before you have to hit the platform. So now I'm going to show you how I wrap my wrists. I believe that the way I wrap is the most supportive for the wrist joint and offers the best secure wrap possible for when training the bench press and also the squat too. So first thing we're going to do is start with the thumb loop on the very tip of your thumb. I prefer to do this as opposed to putting the loop to the base of my thumb because it's also easier to get the thumb loop off once I'm done wrapping. So the first thing we're going to do is take that loop, put it on the tip of your thumb, and then allow the wrap to sit over the top of your wrist, draping downwards towards the floor. Now it's important to note that every time you make one pass around your wrists, you keep the tension on the wrap to make sure that the wrap is not loosening up as you continue to wrap. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten my fist. Now the reason why I do this is because as you tend to wrap your wrist, you're going to cut off circulation and your hand is naturally going to close. The tighter you can squeeze the bar, the more power you'll be able to put out into your bench press. So to increase that, I'm going to keep my fist tight so that when the wrap is fully on my wrist, it'll close my hand from an already fist position, which will help out my grip on the bench. Once my fist is closed, I'm going to start pulling tension out of the wrist wrap and then wrapping around the mid portion of my wrist. After that, I'm going to move up towards the top of my wrist, covering the bottom half of my hand. From there, I'm going to go back down over the middle part of my wrist, down towards the lower part of the wrist joint, and then back up again to the middle. Usually when I pull the wrap over the middle for the second time, I have reached the end of my wrist wrap. From there, I'm going to make sure that the Velcro is completely secured on the wrist wrap, and then I'm going to remove the thumb loop, which is already easy to do because it's on the tip of my thumb. Now, this is a very important thing to think about when you're wrapping, especially with SBD wrist wraps. The Velcro isn't quite as secure as I would like it to be, but I know SBD is a very, very common and popular brand. There have been times when I am lifting a competition or I see somebody else lifting a competition and the Velcro comes undone on SBD wrist wraps. So just make sure that when you do put on the wrist wrap that you really make sure that the Velcro is stuck on there tight. Flatten it out with your hands a few times and then do it again right before you lift. If a wrist wrap comes undone, it could lead to a no lifting competition, which may seem silly, but it's common and it's happened before. So make sure your Velcro is down tight as possible. And that's how you wrap your wrists. The next piece of equipment we're going to be talking about is the lifting belt. Now, it's not mandatory that you use a belt on the bench press in IPF competition, but some people do feel that the belt offers them a better brace and an increase in their intra-abdominal pressure for the bench press. I personally find that because you're lying down on the bench press, the belt doesn't have quite the same carryover as, say, the squat or the deadlift. So try it out. If you like it, keep it. If you don't, then don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. But for those of you who do like to use the belt on bench press, I'll show you how I set it up when I do use it on bench press. So you're going to want to start with the belt much higher on your body than you would on, say, the squat, where the bottom of the belt is at or a little bit above your belly button. And you're also going to want to make sure that the belt is not quite as tight as you would want on squat. Usually I go about a loose fit where I can fit one finger between the belt and my stomach. From here, I'm going to take the belt and then push it down towards my abdomen. Now, I'm only pushing down the front of the belt. The back of the belt I'm keeping at the height it was when it started. And the reason why I do this is because the tilted down position of the belt like this will still help me maintain a very high arch, but will also allow me to breathe into my diaphragm while I'm laying down and to keep all that pressure in my thoracic region while I'm bench pressing. So because of that lying down position, we have to alter the belt's position a little bit, but this offers the best solution for people who do like to use a belt when they bench press. Now the last piece of equipment we're going to be talking about are shoes. Now you can use either a heeled shoe or a flat shoe like we talked about in the squat video from last week, but just make sure that the shoe you're using has enough friction at the bottom that when you implement a leg drive, which we'll talk about momentarily, that your feet are not going to slide, and if they do slide, there's as little sliding as possible. The more friction that your shoes can offer and the less sliding that your feet do in competition, you'll be able to implement stronger leg drive and it'll help your bench press strength tremendously. So try to pick shoes that have a good amount of friction at the bottom. So the last piece of equipment we're going to be talking about is the actual rack you use to bench press on. If you have access to a combination rack such as ER or Eleiko, make sure you're training on that. Combination racks usually offer higher friction bench press pads, which is great for lifters who are lifting a lot of weight like powerlifters are, and they also have adjustable heights for the racks themselves and also neck heights, which is a great tool to use, especially if you do happen to hit a set where you fail on the weight and the only direction that the weight can go is down over your neck. To set up your neck heights properly on the combination rack, take a barbell that is empty or with very light weight and then bring it down to your chest in your natural bench pressing position. Then allow the weight to roll back towards your neck. If the barbell hits the safety racks first and not your neck, that's a good position for you. However, the neck heights should not be high enough that when the bar is brought down to your chest, that there is a likelihood that the bar can crash into the neck heights and throw off your lift. That small space between the height of your chest and the height of your neck is where the neck height should be placed. Now, before we talk about how to adjust the rack height itself for the barbell, I want to talk about the pad on the bench press. If you train in a commercial gym and don't have access to a combination rack, and the pad you use is very slippery and doesn't have a lot of friction, you can take 2 exercise bands and stretch them over the length of the bench press. When you lay down on top of these bands, they will add friction and allow your shirt to grip to the bands so you don't slide around while bench pressing. Trust me when I say that these bands can save you from serious injury when benching on commercial equipment. So now let's talk about how to set up proper rack height for the bench press. The rack height you use on bench press is very important, especially as you get towards the higher intensities for bench press training. If the rack height is too low, you'll have to do a mini bench press to get the bar off of the rack. And likewise, if your rack height is too high, you'll have to unlock your shoulders, which we'll talk about in a minute, and ruin the tightness that you've already developed when setting your arch in order to get the bar off of the rack. So the rack height should be set up just enough that when you do unrack the bar, you have about 4 to 6 centimeters of clearance to easily get the bar over the J-hooks and not ruin your tightness as you begin to set up for your bench press. So the first order of technique talk for the bench press is going to be how to properly set up your arch when you're bench pressing. Now the arch is a very important part of powerlifting bench pressing and is often seen as quote-unquote cheating by other people. The arch allows you a number of different advantages when bench pressing. The first is a decreased range of motion. So when you bring the bar from a locked arm position down to your chest, that's your range of motion. The higher your arch is, the less of a distance the bar is going to have to travel, and therefore the less work you're going to have to do overall for the bench press. The second advantage of the arch is it allows your shoulders to be in a much safer position while bench pressing. Now the way that the shoulder is designed, the joint does not fit more than halfway into the socket at any point in time, and because the bench press puts an inordinate amount of pressure on the shoulders, especially if you flare out your elbows, we want to make sure that your shoulders are in the safest position possible to handle the intense amount of weight that you're going to be using at competition. So how do we set it up exactly for the most effective arch? There are a different number of ways to do this, and no one way is better than another, but I'll show you how I go about to set up my bench press arch. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is to set up my upper back on the bench press. So I'm going to lay down, and then either using the rack heights themselves or the neck heights, I'm going to push against them and bring my scapula together. If you remember from lesson number 2, this is called scapular retraction. And what I'll do after I push my scapula together with the rack heights or the neck heights is I'll use my legs to push my body slightly towards where the spotter would be, and this would depress my scapula. So you could see how scapular retraction and scapular depression is important for both of these lifts, the squat and the bench press, and as we'll talk about next week, the deadlift too. So you're going to make sure that your upper back is as tight as possible. Now, the tighter you can get, the better. If you feel that your upper back is so tight when you do this that it's uncomfortable, you've done a good job. The tighter that you can make yourself, the more stable of a platform you create, and the easier your bench press will become. Now it's important to note that when I'm done setting up my upper back, my eyes are directly below the bar. This is important because later on, when you actually unrack the bar, you want your shoulders to be in a position where it's very easy to handle the weight and you don't ruin the tightness you set up by having to reach too far back in order to get the bar. So when you set up upper back, make sure your eyes are directly below the barbell. Now that you've established your upper back tightness, reach up towards the bar and take your chosen grip width. We'll talk about grip width in just a little bit. But like the squat video, make sure that you're grabbing the bar such that the heel of your hand is supporting the bar. This will also help decrease your range of motion and support your joints properly throughout the lift. Once you've taken a hold of the bar, it's time to establish where your feet are going to be. And this is going to depend on how long your legs are. If you have very long tibias and your kneecap rises above the height of the bench, you're going to take a more forward stance with your feet or a more wide stance with your feet. I personally do both. And the reason why you do this is you want to lower the height of your knee relative to the height of your hip. If your knee is at the height of your hip, or if it's higher than the height of your hip, the likelihood of your butt coming off the bench when bench pressing is much higher. And that's not allowed in competition. The other reason why you wouldn't want your butt coming off the bench is as your butt rises off the bench, pressure is put onto your lower back, and we can increase the likelihood of injury while bench pressing. So, whatever stance you take, make sure that at minimum your knee is about hip height, and at best have it lower than hip height. Now if you're having a very hard time moving your feet wide and far in front of you, and you feel that your hips are cramping up, I recommend doing some mobility exercises for your hips to increase the range of motion that your hips are allowed to move in, so you can easier access this position. And you can do this by taking a lacrosse ball or any firm small ball and foam rolling your hips with it. You're going to want to target 4 muscles surrounding the socket of your hips. The first is your hip flexor. The second is your TFL. Third, glute medius. And fourth is your psoas. Take time after you've warmed up in training to foam roll these muscles every single day to gradually increase your range of motion so you can easier access these positions on bench. You can also directly stretch hip extensor muscles such as your rectus femoris, the biggest hip extensor of your quads, by doing dynamic stretches. When I say dynamic stretches, I mean stretches that have constant movement to them. So you can rock back and forth in a foot elevated rectus femoris stretch, but I would not recommend having any static or long hold stretches prior to training because you can notice a very temporary decrease in strength immediately after holding long static stretches. So the next part about setting up your arch is the unracking of the bar. Now the way we do this, you're going to want to push forward with your legs such that your hips rise up and your butt comes off the bench. Now this is the only time that I would recommend that you raise your butt off the bench. As you push with your legs, you're going to extend your chest up towards the sky and then try to push your butt towards your shoulders. If done properly, your shoulders shouldn't move from where they are, and your butt should move towards your shoulders, increasing the tension placed on the entirety of your back. As you're doing this, push the barbell off of the rack and then bring it over your chest so that it's resting directly over your shoulders, and that the line from your hand to your shoulders is a direct straight line. Once you've successfully unracked the barbell and your hands are directly over your shoulders, place your butt directly down on the bench press, not by relaxing your lower half of your body, but rather by trying to reach with your butt towards your shoulders and then place your butt on the bench there. This will keep the height of your arch and keep the tightness of your back. Now, it's important to note that you don't want to excessively squeeze your lower back, but rather focus on squeezing your thoracic spine or your upper spine. By keeping the pressure on your upper back, you'll decrease the likelihood of squeezing your lower back and then causing injury to your low back as you bench press. Once you've lowered your butt down to the bench press, take a very deep breath all the way to the base of your diaphragm or the bottom of your stomach, and then brace like you did on squat, where you took the biggest breath that you could, push your tongue into the roof of your mouth, and then brace your stomach as if waiting for a punch to the stomach. By doing this, you'll create the most intra-abdominal pressure that you could, and therefore you'll be able to increase the amount of force you put out on the barbell. Now you're ready to lower the barbell to your chest and begin your first rep. When bringing the barbell down to your chest, you want to actively squeeze your upper back as if pulling the bar down to you and not just thinking about controlling it through gravity. The more active your upper back is while bench pressing, the tighter you will create your arch, even still through movement, and you'll be able to create a stronger base for you to push the bar off of once the bar reaches your chest. To do this, you want to tuck your elbows very, very slightly as you lower the barbell down to your chest. Now, if you start to exceed 45 degrees, you're probably tucking a little bit too much. You want to tuck your elbows just enough that when you look at your video from a side angle, like we mentioned in the beginning of this video, that the elbows are just barely in front of the wrist. From here, in order to press up, you want to flare out your elbows just slightly so that your elbows are directly underneath your wrists, all of your joints are stacked on top of each other, and you have the strongest position possible to bench press the weight off of your chest. Now, before we move on from here, we're going to talk about excessive tucking and excessive flaring, and we're also going to talk about bar placement on the chest. So if you excessively tuck your arms, you're going to make this bench press less of a full body movement, which it should be for powerlifting, and more of a tricep movement. So by doing this, you're going to be eliminating many muscles that you could be using in order to get the bar up, and so you should want to avoid over tucking the elbows. Likewise, if you flare out excessively, you put an excessive amount of pressure on your shoulders, and like we mentioned earlier, the shoulders are very easily damaged, especially in movements like the bench press. So you'll want to make sure that you're not flaring out your elbows excessively either. This will come with time and practice, but as long as your upper back is as active and as tight as possible while bringing the bar down to your chest, you're in the right position. So next we're going to talk about where the barbell should be placed on your chest. This will depend on a number of different factors, but for simplicity purposes, we're going to say that the barbell should be placed at the end of your xiphoid process, or the bottom of your sternum. This is directly above your abdomen and directly below the nipple line. Generally speaking, this is the highest part of your arch, and the best place for beginners to start to learn where to pause the barbell on their chest when bench pressing. If you're having trouble figuring out if you're pausing in the same spot every time when you bench press, take some chalk, mark up the barbell, and then bring it down to your chest. As you continue to go through your sets and your reps, stand up and look at yourself in the mirror. If you don't see just one mark of chalk on your chest, you know you're being inconsistent with where you place the barbell on your chest, and you have to be more cognizant of that going forward. Like we mentioned in the squat video, it's very important to be consistent with each and every rep on the bench press, because you want to develop consistency and technique over time. The more consistent you are, the more carryover you'll have when you hit the big numbers, especially in competition. And if you're out of groove, even by a little bit with a maximum weight, it could throw you off and you could miss a lift. So make sure to be as consistent as possible with each and every single rep in training. Next, we're going to talk about how to implement proper leg drive while bench pressing. Like a boxer getting ready to throw a punch, the bench press originates with your feet. The way we implement leg drive, which begins in the concentric or the upward portion of the bench press, begins by taking your feet and pushing your body towards the spotter or the safety rack. You can also think of this by trying to push your toes through the front of your shoes. Now, it's important to note that we are not pushing your feet directly into the floor, but rather pushing forwards. If you push your feet directly into the floor, you increase the likelihood of your butt coming up off of the bench, which, as we mentioned, is not good for a couple of reasons. We want to put lateral pressure by pushing your feet forwards and pushing your body towards the spotter or towards the rack. This will keep your butt down on the bench and it will help you to use your quads to properly drive the weight off of your chest and back towards the locked position. If you do this without any weight in your hands, you'll see that your body slides backwards on the bench press. This is exactly how you should implement leg drive. Now we're going to talk about grip width for a second. The max grip width you're allowed to take in any IPF competition is 81 centimeters, which is the distance between one ring to the next on the bench press. You have to have these rings covered if you do take a wide grip on the bench press, so your index finger cannot go beyond those rings. If they are exposed, that will result in a red light from the judges. A wide grip, generally speaking, will be slower overall in movement, but it'll be more consistent. If you do decide to take a much narrower grip, say a shoulder width grip, it'll be faster off your chest, but will have a much harder sticking point and you'll have to push that with more effort. Both grips are legal within the realms of competition, but I recommend taking the widest grip you possibly can. But if you don't feel that the max width which is allowed in competition is suitable for you, or you feel uncomfortable doing it, take the measurement of one AC joint to another AC joint, multiply it by 1.5, and take that distance as your grip width. While we're on the topic of grip, make sure that your thumb is wrapped around the barbell. You cannot have what's called a suicide grip, where your thumb is on top of the bar. You must have a thumb wrapped around grip on the bench press in IPF competition. There are a few good accessory movements that you can use to increase your bench press. The first is any movement that will increase your upper back strength. As we mentioned before, your upper back is the base for your bench press, and by creating a stronger upper back, you'll better be able to establish this base and to lower the barbell down to your chest with control. So movements like weighted inverted rows, barbell bent over rows, pendlay rows, wide grip lat pull downs, one arm dumbbell rows are all good tools for you to increase the strength of your upper back and to increase the eccentric strength of your bench press. If you seem to get stuck midway through the bench press as you press the weight off your chest or towards the top half of your bench press, you can implement direct shoulder or tricep work into your training. So you can do movements like Arnold press, military press, dumbbell lateral raises, face pulls, or work on direct tricep work such as tricep press downs. By strengthening these portions of your body, you'll have direct carryover to the upper half of your bench press. In IPF regulation competition, there are 3 commands in the bench press. The first command is given once the lifter has handed the barbell and has showed the judges that he has control over the weight. The first command is start. Once the start command is given, the lifter is then allowed to lower the barbell down to their chest and pause. At this point, the judges will tell the lifter, press. The press command will only be given if the head judge sees that the lifter has control over the weight at the chest and the weight has stopped oscillating completely. Once the lifter hears the press command, they can then press the weight off of their chest and then return the weight to the locked elbow position. At this point, the lifter must wait and hold the weight until the head judge says rack, which is the third command. The rack command is only given once the judge has seen that the lifter has returned the weight back to the original position and the weight is stable and under the lifter's control. But there are several reasons why you might receive red lights on the bench press in IPF competition. For a red card and a red lift, a lifter would have failed to bring the bar completely to their chest, which doesn't happen often in competition. Another reason for a red card would be that the barbell came into contact with the lifter's belt. This would automatically result in a no lift, even if the lifter presses the weight off of their chest and returns the barbell to lockout. A blue card will be presented by the judges in the event of any downward movement during the bench press. Once the bar begins to enter the concentric phase, it can stop, but it is not allowed to descend at any point after the press command has been called. This also means that once the press command is called, the lifter cannot heave the bar into their chest. Some people implement what's called a sink descent into their chest. This is fine to do and not the same thing as heaving. But once the press command is called, the lifter cannot lower the weight any further. So, if you do what's called a soft touch, where the barbell barely comes into contact with the lifter's shirt, you cannot lower the weight to bring the barbell into your sternum again once the press command is called. Otherwise, you'll receive a blue card. Another reason for a blue card would be that the lifter's elbows were not locked at either the beginning or the end of the bench press. In the event of somebody who has a injured elbow and cannot fully extend their arm, the lifter can show the judges prior to lifting that the lifter can physically not extend their arm past a certain point. Once the judges see this, they will allow the lifter to return the barbell to the most capable lock position that the lifter can handle. A yellow card will be presented by the judges in the event of your head, shoulders, or butt raising off the bench after the start command has been called by the judges. A yellow card can also be presented in the event that the feet contact the support beams on the bench press itself, or if the feet turn in any way such that there is no longer full contact with the shoe and the ground. Thank you very much for joining us in lesson number 3 for the Thailand Powerlifting Federation Online Academy. Next week we're going to be talking about how to deadlift 101. In this lesson we're going to be learning about the difference between sumo and conventional deadlift, which one may be right for you, how to set up your start position to minimize lower back involvement, different grip styles and their role in your lifting anatomy, and common mistakes in training the deadlift. We'll also be talking about the IPF rules for the deadlift, and when you might receive a red, blue, or yellow card in the deadlift. Thank you very much. Thank you to JCW Events for hosting this online academy, and we'll see you in lesson number 4.